here that they can pick up. Institute class, and I'm Dr. Jim Paul. I'll take you on a little journey this morning in local history from 1838 until 1860. It is a webinar, which means that we not only have you in person, but we also have students and others watching remotely. The purpose of this local history course, which I've entitled Episode 2, Antebellum Abolitionists from 1838 to 1860, is to immerse you in local history, our local history, specifically Bourbonnais Grove local history, and a little bit of Kankakee, because this time period, 1838 to 60, was mainly a time when Bourbonnais Grove was the principal settlement in this area. Kankakee didn't develop until the Illinois Central Railroad came through in 1853. Then the county was formed, so that's much later than 1838. Going to get you involved in an intense immersion of decision-making in the pre-Civil War years. Antebellum refers to the pre-Civil War years. And the abolitionists were individuals, as you see here, Thomas and Margaret Durham, who arrived in Bourbonnais Grove in 1835 and were the original settlers of what we now know today as the Perry Farm Park. You need to have pen and paper because you'll be writing down a couple of things, not a lot, a couple of things. You'll be writing down some things, but you don't need to worry about all of the material that's going to be involved in this presentation because it will be on the Bourbonnais Grove Historical Society website, www.bourbonnaishistory.org. If you want to write that down, you can. And if you go under in the menu for members, resources, local history series, you'll find this, not now, but eventually, since it's being recorded, it will be on our YouTube channel, which is on that page, as episode 2. Episode 1 was Potawatomi Peril. That whole program there is already online. And I'll also have the antebellum abolitionist narrative there, which is all of the information I'm going to present without many notes. But all the notes will be online on this page for members, resources, local history series. Not only the YouTube channel, but also the narrative, the slides, and my narrative. So you don't have many handouts today. All you have is a paper and your pen. My daughter designed this graphic illustration of what Thomas and Peggy Durham looked like when they arrived from Vermilion Grove, south of Danville, in 1835 with their 9 children. Now I need you to go back in time, and I want you to think that you're living in the Kankakee area, River Valley, during the 1850s, and I want you to pick a number from 1 to 10 and write that down. Now, the number that you picked is going to represent someone that will be a companion of yours on this journey into the 1850s. Now, I want you to write down your companion's name. If you pick number 1, you're a French-Canadian farmer. If you pick number 2, you're a French-Canadian shopkeeper. If you pick number 3, you're a Quaker member of the Durham family. If you pick number 4, you're a shopkeeper from Chicago. If you pick number 5, you're a Methodist farmer. If you pick number 6, an equal rights activist. If you pick number 7, you're a Bourbonnais Township official. If you pick number 8, you're a Roman Catholic clergy person, nun or a priest. If you pick number 9, you're a Kankakee County law enforcement official. Or if you pick number 10, you're a teacher. All right? That's important to remember. This person's going along. And at the conclusion of today's journey, you'll find out how this person addressed abolition, slavery, the whole issue before 1860. Now you have to pick a name for yourself as a person living in the 1850s. I'm afraid so this person isn't going along with you. I said that wrong. This person is you. This is who you are. I'm sorry, somehow I got ahead of myself. I got to do a little loop. This is the person that you are. Okay, pick a name for yourself. Are we good? All right, so you know who you are and you know your occupation. Now you just have to write your name down. Now, we're going to do a little defining. An abolitionist is a person who was opposed to slavery as an institution and other social extremes like capital punishment. Antebellum refers to the time period before the Civil War. A Fugitive Slave Act is what we're going to be dealing with. It was enacted originally in Congress in 1793, then reinforced in 1850. And it provided the seizure and return of runaway slaves who escaped from one state to another, and they had to be turned back to the slave owner. Fugitives could not testify on their own behalf, nor were they permitted a trial. Heavy penalties were imposed on federal marshals who refused to enforce this, and penalties were also imposed on individuals who helped runaway slaves. And the penalties were, please write it down, $16,000 fine in today's terms. Back then it was $1,000. In today's terminology, $16,000, and 6 months in jail. So if you were involved in assisting a runaway slave, you violated the Runaway Slave Act, Fugitive Slave Act, and committed a felony. And that was your penalty if you were caught. Do you understand? Many Northerners said this bloodhound law, because bloodhounds were used to chase down the runaways, is really a slave power conspiracy to get more power. Now, the Underground Railroad, I'm sure you've heard about, but it was a system of cooperation among active anti-slavery people in the United States before 1863, by which people escaping enslavement were secretly helped to reach the North or Canada. But the North wasn't good enough necessarily with the Fugitive Slave Act. They had to get to Canada. Totally. The anti-slavery record back in 1837, the time period that we're kind of picking up here, shows on its cover a runaway slave. They have a little alphabet. E is the eagle soaring high, an emblem of the free. But while we chain our brother man, our type he cannot be. F. F is the heartsick fugitive, the slave who runs away and travels through the slavery night, the dreary night, thank you, but hides himself by day. All right, now I want you to pick one of these statements. You're living in the Kankakee River Valley in Bourbonnais Grove in the 1850s, and the Fugitive Slave Act has been enacted. And there are going to be 5 possible responses that you might have. You're not in Southern Illinois, you're not in Central Illinois, you're in Northeastern Illinois. These are the 5. I want you to write down which one or 2 or 3 or all 5 you agree with. Number 1, to this time, I had no opinion on the issue of slavery, but now I believe that silence on this issue is to be complicit. Number 2, I believe that continuing compromise with slave states on the issue of slavery is cowardice. Number 3, since slavery is spreading as new territories become states, I think it is better to advocate for abolition of slavery, even though bloodshed will be involved. Number 4, in an armed conflict, I am not sure which side, pro-slavery or anti-slavery combatants, will prevail, but I am willing to stand with the anti-slavery forces. And number 5, I will help hide runaway slaves and thereby commit a felony. So I want you to pick as many of those that you agree with. As a Kankakee River Valley settler in the 1850s.
Now we're picking according to the person we are.
Yes,
Okay.
according to the person you
Not
are, not today. We're in the 1850s. Thank you for that question. Now I'm going to give you the people that are going to be your companion, or the one person that's your companion. So please write down a number from 1 to 10 again. And I will put the 10 people up that will travel along with you. Here you see a sketch by Vic Johnson of Bourbonnais Grove. And a lot of the material that I'm using is Vic Johnson's and his archival material that he's gained from Robert Durham, a relative of the Durham family, and Don Supay. Our records are kind of meager on Bourbonnais Grove history, and it was Bourbonnais Grove until 1875 when the village was incorporated. Before that, detailed records were not kept. And the ones that were kept, some of them were burnt up in a fire in a grocery store where the village, once it was even incorporated, where the village trustees met. And the Durhams have not a lot of records that I could find. So I had to rely on a lot of material that I found through Ancestry.com, the digital records that were kept there, and from the material that Vic Johnson gained from the Durham family. Anyway, here you see Bourbonnais Grove in the 1840s and 50s. This is the Durham house right here. This is where the Perry farmhouse is today. This was the Bourbonnais Trace, or the Danville to Chicago Road was right here, and the Bourbonnais Trace was right here, what we call Kennedy Drive today. And the Danville to Chicago Road was the route of a lot of runaway slaves during the 1850s on their way up to Wilmington eventually and to Chicago. Here we see the log schoolhouse that's under construction right now, restoration in Bourbonnais next to the Letourneau home. We see Noel Levasseur brick home that Thomas Durham built, and his trading post was right there where Olivet Nazarene University is today. There's St. Leo's Chapel in 1841, which is now maternity of the Blessed Virgin Mary Church. The Bourbonnais, Francois Bourbonnais Senior family lived here, and this is where we think the George Letourneau home was originally built when the Bourbonnais left the area, and they went ahead and built a pioneer structure there. Eventually, it was moved over to Stratford Drive East, where it is today, the Letourneau home. Anyway, you have your number picked. And if you picked a number from 1 to 10, you either now have Thomas Durham going with you, or his wife Margaret Durham. You'll have Noel Levasseur or his wife Ruth Levasseur going with you. You'll have George Letourneau or Elodie Letourneau, his wife, husband and wife, going with you. You might have Father Charles Shinneke going with you, or Martha Durham Perry going with you, the daughter of Margaret and Thomas Durham, who married David Perry. You might have that person going with you, or the Methodist Reverend Stephen Beggs. All right, you have your companion written down. Good. This is the Durham house that you'll be visiting on November the 5th, 1853 in the evening. It was originally a log home, But in 1840, they built it as a tidewater stack house with an I-frame. And this is the front of it, what would be facing Kennedy Drive today. In the back, they had a little extension that was called a parlor or a tavern, because it was a stagecoach stop in the 1840s and 50s from Momence up to Chicago. So this is the home that you'll be visiting. And I want you to not worry so much about this question. You know he's going to ask you this question. Will you assist in the hiding of runaway slaves? Because he and his family are Quaker abolitionists, which I'll tell you about in just a few minutes. But I want you to think of a question that you, as your persona from the 1850s, will ask Thomas Durham when you come to his home. So you identify yourself, tell him please your name, because he's he's having a lot of people in the house, he doesn't know everybody. And so you're going to refresh his memory, what your name is and what your occupation is. And then you'll ask a question of him. All right. Thomas Durham died in March of 1864. It's cut off there, but 6 days after he died, the Republican Party was formed in 1854. Before that, it was the Whig Party, or let's say the Whig Party, when it disintegrated, many of the members became Republicans. But in 1833, the Whig Party formed in opposition to Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act, and began to self-destruct over the expansion of slavery into the new territories. At one point in 1856, by 1852, their choice, General Winfield Scott, lost to Franklin Pierce. And so the Whig Party was virtually dead by that time, and the Republican Party had assumed itself at the forefront. So the new Republican Party had three factions: radical or black Republicans who were abolitionists, moderate Republicans like Abraham Lincoln who were for free soil but opposed both slavery and abolitionism, and conservative Republicans who thought slavery was bad because it hurt white people and blocked progress. So it's kind of important to remember those three factions within the Republican Party: radical or black, moderate like Lincoln, or conservative. So between 1854 and 1860, these are just some of the actions that took place in our country: the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, the Compton Crisis in 1857-58, the Dred Scott decision, which is important, and I put it down here, because African Americans are declared property, so they're not protected by the United States Constitution. And then, of course, the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. Now remember, the Fugitive Slave Act had been reinforced already in 1850, so tensions are getting very high. Father Charles Shinneke, that's who you see there. He arrived in Bourbonnais Grove in 1851 at the age of 42 when he became pastor of Maternity of the Blessed Virgin Mary Church for a short time. He then got into a big dispute with Chicago Diocese Bishop Anthony O'Regan, Irish person, over the treatment of the French Canadians. Like, French wasn't supposed to be used in Mass or in the sacraments, and he felt that there was prejudice against many in the Chicago Diocese. Now, there was no Joliet Diocese at that point. That didn't come until the 20th century. We at one point were part of the Vincennes Diocese, until the 1830s, and then we became part of the Chicago diocese. So when Shinneke came down, he was already edgy about a few things, and then he left Bourbonnais Grove and went to St. Anne area, and he began to recruit more French Canadian settlers here into this area. He got into a libel suit with Peter Spink in 1855, and Abraham Lincoln defended him. He was eventually suspended from the Roman Catholic Church, then excommunicated in 1856. So he left and formed his own church that eventually was a branch of the Presbyterian Church, and he went back to Canada in 1873. So he's one of the persons that might be a companion with you. He was pro-temperance. He wasn't like a lot of the other French Canadians, because when he left with a couple of families for St. Anne, that split the families up in Bourbonnais Grove, because some of their family members were now going with this schism, this sect moving away, and eventually they were excommunicated from the Roman Catholic Church. So this is also going on in the 1850s in our area. George Letourneau is another prominent person of this time period, and he had been a Bourbonnais Township supervisor, but the big, I think, career change for him was that he was running on the ticket. There you see his name spelled incorrectly, with Abraham Lincoln at the top of the ticket, the Republican ticket, and of course they both won in 1860. There's the rail splitter, there's Bourbonnais Township. George Letourneau's political career involved a lot of Bourbonnais Township supervisory posts. He was a delegate to the first Republican State Convention in 1856, and he heard the so-called lost speech of Abraham Lincoln because they were so spellbound, the attendees, when he talked about the House divided against itself cannot stand. They were in shock, and so it's so-called lost speech. He later gave the speech again in Peoria, and of course we have the record from that. He was Kankakee County coroner, county clerk, circuit clerk, first mayor of Bourbonnais, later Kankakee County sheriff, county treasurer, mayor of Kankakee in 1891-92, Illinois state senator, and he ended his career right before he died in 1906 as deputy county treasurer. The Underground Railroad, here you see a map of it, the different lines, and Joseph Pat Tedder and his family in 1862 had a station of the Underground Railroad in Pembroke Township. And that we also know that David Aldrich's roundhouse in Wilmington was a station on the Underground Railroad. Now, we can never prove that any of the homes, including Thomas and Peggy Durham's home, were stations on the Underground Railroad, but you can come to your own conclusions on this. The Tedder family. In 1860, the census only showed in this area 20 African Americans living in Kankakee County. The Tedders moved in right before the Civil War, and they purchased land, and they were, it's pretty well documented that they operated a station on the Underground Railroad at Hopkins Park in 1862, or before. The Durham house is now the Perry farmhouse, the way it looks today. And we know that there is local folklore that Thomas Durham and his Quaker family harbored fugitive slaves. It's hard to prove it. There is a little evidence of a insulated cellar where they may have hidden at, but they may have hidden in other homes too. They may have spread out in the area. It's hard to document. They may have lived at Martha and David Perry's home, which is just across the street from Margaret and Thomas Durham, the father and mother-in-law of David Perry, and the father and mother of Martha. It's hard to document all this, but I think it's appropriate that the horse barn at the Perry farm today has a quilt on it. It's the barn quilt titled Shutter. It's a camera shutter. And interesting that the stations along the Underground Railroad often had quilts symbolizing. Now, this is still kind of controversial. We're not sure if this is all accurate, but we think if the flying geese were held out, that was a signal for the runaways to do this. If the North Star was out, this was a signal that they should keep this in mind. And if the rose wreath was out, it meant that someone had died on a journey. Thomas Durham died March 13th, 1854. He's buried at the near the home that he built in Perry Farm Park of Durham Perry Farmstead in Millennium Garden area. So you can go see his grave today. All right. I'm going to change from who I was to who I am now. Well, good day today. I'm Thomas Durham. Welcome to the time in which I live. And I would like to tell you a little bit about myself. During the time in which I lived, I grew up with all of these different issues related to the abolition of slavery, the expansion of slavery. I was born October the 1st, 1784, just one day's horse ride south of Yorktown, where General Cornwallis was defeated by George Washington and General Rochambeau in 1781. I was a middle child of Thomas and Arabella Durham, and we lived in the southern Virginia area of Brunswick County. My father became a Quaker before I was born, 2 years before I was born in 1782. Now, the Quaker tradition began in the 1650s when, as a denomination, they broke away from the Church of England. And they wanted to stress more the equality of all people and social issues. They were opposed to capital punishment and war and slavery. And so within a few years, my father freed the 10 slaves that we held in Southern Virginia. My brothers and sisters and I grew up with that tradition. And in Southern Virginia, that was a bit awkward. As I said, my father freed our slaves. And as you know, the Underground Railroad was beginning to help individuals in bondage to escape to the north. There was a society for promoting the abolition of slavery formed in Philadelphia by Benjamin Franklin. And in 1790, the statistics were these: 700,000 slaves in a nation of 3.9 million. The slaves attempted to flee north. As we've mentioned already, or you've been informed, in 1793, the first Fugitive Slave Act was passed. My father died in 1794 when I was not quite 10 years old yet. And just a few years later, we decided we had to move from Virginia. Also, in this time period, the Liberty Party was formed for the abolition of slavery. I can't say more about this Liberty Party, except that when I moved along, I eventually became conscious of that political movement. Otherwise, I was involved with the Whig Party. I didn't live long enough to become a member of the Republican Party, but I think you know my point of view. There's the promotion of abolition of slavery in Philadelphia, individuals carrying a coffin representing slavery. When the American Revolution was over, the Illinois country was controlled by my Commonwealth of Virginia. There you see Virginia, the emblem, and the Illinois County of Virginia, Kaskaskia, Vincennes, Fort Chartres, Cahokia, and this is all part of the Illinois County of Virginia. In 1787, the Northwest Territories were formed, as you see on this map. The Northwest Territories were to be forever slave-free. In 1802, the Durham family left Brunswick County. We moved east to the northeastern part of Tennessee, where there were a few slaves and subsistence agriculture. We joined a Newberry monthly meeting assembly in Friendsville, Tennessee. There I met Peggy, and we were married in 1811. Her family were slave owners. Her parents had a plantation. And so when I married her, I was disbanded from the Quaker Assembly for two reasons. I had married a non-Quaker, and I had married a person whose family owned slaves. It took a while for me to get back into the assembly, but eventually Peggy did too. We moved there, and then as time went on, we made our way. I would do the scouting, and then I would come back and get Peggy and our children that were being born one after the other. And we eventually ended up in Lick Creek, Indiana, an integrated community, and we were bringing our freed slaves along with us. And in Lick Creek, Indiana, there already was, well, it was still the end, it was Indiana. It was already an area that was populated by whites and blacks together. My family then moved to Honey Creek monthly meeting area south of what is today Terre Haute and Vigo County. And that's where we were when Illinois became a state in 1818. But what kind of a state is it going to be? Before we leave this slide, I wanted to show you, this technology is amazing. I don't know how this all works as I'm in the 1850s. But anyway, our family cemetery is still located in this Honey Creek area south of Terre Haute. Eventually, my family and my children, my wife and children, and some of my extended family were moved to Vermilion Grove south of Danville, and then eventually to Bourbonnais Grove. Again, you can see where I came from, number one, where we went to, number two, then where we went to, number three, before moving up to the northeastern Illinois. But we were hesitant to go into northeastern Illinois because was Illinois really going to be a free state because it was supposed to be by the Northwest Ordinance Decree, or was it not going to be a free state? That was the question. The southern part of Illinois was pretty well populated. They did a lot of business with Missouri and Kentucky, slave states. And a lot of these individuals down here were former slave owners or still had some slaves, but now it's going to be referred to as indentured servitude. Well, up in the northeast, it was not very populated. It was open. Potawatomi and other Native Americans were vacating the area, and the land became open for individuals to move into. The prairie was open, but did individuals really from the north, the northeast, our Quakers want to move into northeastern Illinois if Illinois was going to be a slave state? And so we hesitated. We waited. We waited. And we stayed in Indiana until 1825. Now, the Northwest Ordinance had allowed our grandfather, French colonials who built Fort de Chartres, and you see another house that was built in St. Genevieve, Missouri. The Northwest Ordinance allowed the French colonials to keep their slaves. I don't know what the reasoning was there. Some said, oh, well, the French colonials had genteel slavery. My point of view is, that is absurd. Slavery is slavery. And so, in 1818, when Illinois became a state, it was like there was some kind of a compromise going on. And the second governor said, that's not enough. We can't have pseudo-slavery existing here. And so in 1824, there was a referendum. And by about 1,000 votes, over 6,000 versus 5,000 against, on the referendum was an issue to allow slavery in Illinois. And the anti-slavery votes outweighed the pro-slavery votes. And at that point, in 1824, I realized, and so did Peggy, that now Illinois was safe. I thought. Now I wonder, when you came to northeastern Illinois, was slavery or abolition of slavery a factor in your family's decision to move to northeastern Illinois? Was it a factor for you? How do you feel about the neutral stand on slavery and abolition taken by the Illinois legislature? And I'll tell you about that now. How do you feel about the question of equality for women, Indians, and Negroes? In 1837, unanimously, the Illinois Senate passed and denounced abolition in Illinois. Now, what had happened? Elijah Lovejoy had a press in Alton, Illinois, and it was pro-abolition. And eventually, after many hardships, he was executed outside of his burning press room by pro-slavery forces. Now, the issue came up in the assembly. And as I said, unanimously, the Senate denounced abolition as too extreme. It was extremely anti-slavery, causing resentment and disharmony and violence in Illinois and other areas, as much as slavery was the other extreme. Well, in 1837, Abraham Lincoln and his colleague Dan Stone in the House of Representatives made a statement. We believe that the institution of slavery is founded on both injustice and bad policy, but the promulgation of abolition doctrines tends to rather increase than to abate its evils. Moderate, 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 and eventually a moderate Republican point of view. This is what the map looked like in the 1820s, with Missouri coming in as a state. Well, after 1824, we decided to move to Vermilion County, to Vermilion Grove, south of Danville. And I became involved in Vermilion Grove Friends Church, and I was asked to build, and I did, the first brick Vermilion courthouse in this time period. Gurdon Hubbard had come down on his travels from Chicago and saw this beautiful structure and asked if I would build a warehouse for him in Chicago. And I agreed. And we had overcome our displeasure with Illinois and its stand on slavery, and we could tolerate what was going on. So we moved then to Vermilion Grove up to Bourbonnais Grove. And we were welcomed by the Potawatomi, and here we came on our covered wagon, and we had they even built us a temporary wigwam to live in before the log schoolhouse was built. Here I am tilling the plow with the plow of the prairie for the first time. This is the Bourbonnais Creek flowing into the Kankakee River. Such a beautiful area. I fell in love with this area known as Twin Oaks. There were many other movements afoot during this time period. Those who were arguing for female rights also agreed with the abolition movement. They went hand in hand for a while. And there were various anti-slavery societies being formed in the North. As time went on, the main issue, I think, that caused things to really come to a head was the Mexican War between the United States and Mexico. And the United States won. I'm not going to go into the war, but the results. Half of Mexico was lost to the United States, and they would become free or slave states, intensifying the crisis that already existed. For example, in the Compromise of 1850, California entered as a free state, but Utah and New Mexico territories were open to slavery, and the Fugitive Slave Act was strengthened. Chicago, after Elijah Lovejoy's execution in Alton, became an abolitionist city. Its population had jumped from 100 in 1830 to over 4,000 in 1840. So Chicago, now an abolitionist city, became a hub for a lot of the runaway slaves. And especially what was going on in St. Louis nearby, the slave markets intensified the anti-slavery movement. Again, you see the map of Bourbonnais Grove. The French Canadian settlers came in droves in the 1840s. And you can see the statistics. In 1846, there were 22 French Canadian families in Bourbonnais Grove. In 1847, there were 77 French Canadian families, or 471 persons. In 1 year, look at the jump. There was prejudice against French Canadians. 4 reasons for that prejudice. They were foreign immigrants, they spoke French, they were Roman Catholic, and they were poor farmers. So other individuals felt that they were being displaced by these individuals, these foreigners who spoke a tongue they didn't understand. The Roman Catholic Church had been opposed to slavery since the 1400s, at least in the letters of the popes to the bishops, the encyclicals. And in 1833, slavery was abolished in the British Empire, which meant Canada had slavery abolished in that same year. So the French Canadians, when they came to Bourbonnais Grove, were already in the abolitionist spirit. I was involved in the construction of the first log schoolhouse in Bourbonnais Grove because I was then Rock Village Precinct Commissioner in Will County. And so the log schoolhouse was built right near my home. And during the time of the log school, 1837 to 1848, those years as it functioned as a school, those are our children that would have been able to attend the school. Noel and Ruth Levasseur had a beautiful home built by me. And it was built in 1837, the same year that the log schoolhouse was built. The trading post that Noel Levasseur established in Bourbonnais Grove is indicated right here. There's Ruth Levasseur, and they had 8 children. The log schoolhouse was also used as a meeting house for the Methodist missionary circuit riders. John Wesley was passionately opposed to slavery. Reverend Francis Asbury at one point told George Washington in Virginia of his opposition to slavery. Reverend Jesse Walker brought Methodism into this area, to Will County, and he was followed in suit by many other Methodist missionaries. And here you see the Reverend Stephen Beggs. He was a circuit rider, one of the circuit riders to Bourbonnais Grove in the 1840s. He, by the way, was the first one to establish the Methodist Church of Chicago by presiding over liturgy in Fort Dearborn in 1831. And so the issue has become intense. The runaways are increasing. And again, you can see the map that shows the routes of the Underground Railroad. In northeastern Illinois, Chicago, right near Canada, is a primary location. In 1853, the Illinois Central came through, and just a short while later, Kankakee County was formed in 1855. And now we're going to visit at my home. I want you to think about these questions again. And I welcome you this evening, November 5th, 1853, to my home. I trust that Peggy and the children have taken care of you. Not all my children are at home anyway. As you know, Martha has married David Perry. They live now across the street. But if there's anything that you need, tea or some other beverage, or I'm sure they'll bring you some pastries and baked goods as well. But I welcome you to my home, and I'd like to ask you to tell me your name and ask me whatever is on your mind, your question. Shall I start with those that are in our remote location first?
They're shaking their heads no.
Shall I start with those that are in class first? And so, dear lady, welcome to my home. And what is your name?
Margaret.
Margaret. And what is your occupation?
I'm equal rights activist.
Oh my, thank you. And did you have a question for me?
I do. Did you actually assist slaves in their trek north?
I did.
How many approximately?
We have not kept records because this is a very secret business. And I don't want to reveal too much. I've said too much already. There is law enforcement here today, represented. And I'm not sure what their attitude is on what I just said. Do we understand each
I
other?
do, yeah, I understand.
And how are you doing with your pursuit of equal rights for all people, whether they be Black, white, Native American, women, men?
I am definitely anti-slavery.
Are you for female suffrage?
Of course,
Why is that?
because I feel we're equal, should have equal rights, we should have the same.
Don't you have enough say through your husband?
He does not necessarily speak my mind.
And of course, I'm assuming you're married,
I am. Yes.
but if you weren't, that would really be a problem. Thank you for your question. And you, dear lady, could you tell me your name?
My name is Elizabeth, and I am a nun. Come down from with the French Canadians when they came down and assisting in the Catholic Church.
I see. So you're a nun.
Oh, she's a nun, I couldn't hear.
Sorry,
And what is your name again, dear sister?
Elizabeth.
Sister Elizabeth. Well, thank you. And did you have a question for me, Sister Elizabeth?
My question is more how I can be available, since as a nun, I do not, chastity, and I don't have any earthly things or even a room to hide people in, how I could best help in the slavery.
I see. So you have access to church property, though, do you not?
Yes, I would assume that, yes,
And you live in some type of dwelling, whether other nuns live there with you, I don't know. If it's a convent, how large it is, I'm not so familiar with this, but I think there is a way that you could assist. And so how do you think the other nuns feel about this?
we talk about it in the evenings when we're by ourselves, and we feel that we should support God's people and that we're all created equal in God's eyes, so that we are supportive of the abolitionists movement to be able to help the slaves to become non-slaves.
But what if a vigilante turns you in?
Well, that's where our religion is, that we would put it in God's hands and assume that He would stand by us.
So you're willing to make that sacrifice,
Right.
as you also are, Margaret. Thank you very much. And you, sir, can you tell me what your name is and your occupation?
My name is Robert. I'm a Bourbonnais Township official.
Oh my. Welcome to my home.
It is a pleasure to be here.
Did you have a question for me?
How great do you think the risk is of being caught and actually jailed for helping runaway slaves?
It depends. Is there a law enforcement official here? Is there a law enforcement official online?
Doesn't look like it.
Well, when all this is going on, you have your own moral prerogatives and your own moral obligations. Let me ask you, and what did you say your name was? Robert? Robert, how do you personally feel about this issue?
Personally, I would like to help the runaway slaves, but I'm not sure that I should risk my family's well-being by the possibility of being jailed.
What is your connection to the law enforcement officials in the new county?
I know a number of them, and they feel a commitment to uphold the law.
Agree. I also feel that commitment. But at times when the law is unjust, could you turn your head the other way?
If there were no federal officials in town, in our area, it would be much easier to turn. I think the local law enforcement might also be willing to turn, but if people from the federal government came in, that would be a great risk.
This is a small community, 500 people, Bourbonnais Grove. There's hardly any Kankakee to speak of. The railroad has come through now on July 4th, but it's just a non-entity at this point. The possibility of federal marshals coming to this area is somewhat remote. Could you assist by turning away from this? Turning your head the other way.
Not sure I'd be willing to make a public statement.
No, of course. Agreed. As I am reluctant to say too much more to Margaret, although I've said enough to cause a problem. If there are public officials here, especially federal officials, I'm glad you've made that point. Thank you very much, Robert. And you, sir, what is your name?
Frank, I'm a shopkeeper from Chicago.
Welcome, Frank. And do you go back home periodically?
Back and forth, yes.
All right. And your question, Frank?
Well, I'm concerned in commerce from Chicago and in the surrounding area, just how these issues are going to affect the business climate. With the abolitionists and pro-slavery representing extreme positions here as a businessman, more centrist, I guess.
It does cause a problem when you have two extremes at war with each other, not necessarily literally, but figuratively. When you have extremists on either side, there should be a little room for compromise. But I'm not going to compromise my abolitionism.
I respect you for that.
And would you compromise your attitude of social justice, which I know you bring down from Chicago, your attitude of social justice for all, in favoring commerce?
I struggle with that, yes.
As the railroad has come through, you're going to be able to make more money now by delivering your goods a lot more than ever before for you. What type of goods do you, what type of goods are you a shopkeeper of?
This would be household goods.
And so you're going to be able to move and transport these goods much more easily. You're going to be able to make money regardless. So I think it's time for you, Frank, to decide what your moral conscience asks you to decide.
Puts it to me well.
Thank you for your question, Frank. And you, sir, what is your name and your occupation?
Hello, Thomas. My name's Stuart. And I am a equal rights activist. Like Margaret.
Thank you, Stuart. Did you have a question for me?
Yes. I'm new to Bourbonnais Grove. And thank you for the hospitality of your house. And thank you.
You're so welcome, Stuart.
The, well, my question is how, do you know how many people in Bourbonnais Grove are pro-slavery? I know there's a lot of French Canadians here, and that's why I came here because of that, but I still like to hear if there's an opposition.
Bourbonnais Grove is only French Canadian and my Quaker family.
Only, nobody else?
David Perry is a carpenter, grist mill operator from Vermont.
But isn't there like, how many people are here? Isn't
There are other people in other parts of the River Valley
like, isn't there like 500 people here?
in Bourbonnais Grove.
Yes.
Most of them are French Canadian.
Do you know that there, you know all 500?
That's why we are here.
You know all 500?
I do not know their thinking. I can only surmise what I would like for them to think. How do you feel about your equal rights
Oh,
activism?
I am totally pro anti-slavery, and I'm willing to risk my life for that. However, I still need to make choices of where I live. I don't live here. I'm looking for a place to live in. Am I going to live in a area that is going to have combatants or not? Because if I'm going to raise a family, I'd rather not have that.
You're in northeastern Illinois. You're not going to move to southern Illinois or central Illinois,
No.
are you?
I just want to know, should I move further north or should I stay here?
You'll have to make that decision on your own.
Yes.
But we're going to,
With your information.
you're finding out what these individuals feel now,
Yes.
what their expressions are. And with your equal rights campaign, and you're opposed to slavery, and so you want equal rights for Black people, you want equal rights, do you, for women?
Oh, yes, all humans.
Native Americans,
Yes.
Chinese,
And
and other Asians.
I'm sad to see that the Indians are being treated that way.
Thank you. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Thomas.
And dear lady, what is your name and occupation?
My name is Marguerite, and I am also a Bourbonnais Township official. And I am a single woman, and I left Quebec because, and I came here with many family members, cousins, siblings, and we came here because of poverty. We literally were starving. And so we came here to find a new way. And we also knew that many Catholics, which we are, were coming here. So we came with many family members. So I know many people. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I am a Bourbonnais Township official, although I am a single woman, considered a very negative thing. I'm a spinster. And I am in my 20s, but that is still not a positive for a woman. So I am connected, okay, so to speak, because I have many cousins and many relatives. So I am willing, because I left Canada, to take a stand here. I took a stand by coming. So I'm a very independent person, and I am willing to fight hard. As an abolitionist, willing to put my life on the line because I believe that. I believe that I need to be committed to something and a new way of life. And I would like this to be an area with a new way of life. And I'm here because I heard your stand And I'm very excited to meet you and get to know you and see if we can work together on many of these issues.
Did you have a question for me, Marguerite?
Maybe I didn't really have a question. I guess I came to get to know you to see if we can work as a team. If the officials in Bourbonnais Township can join with you and do many of the good things that you have been taking a stand on, and we can do this together.
All right, I have a question for you. Father Shinnicky has caused disruption in the French Canadian community. Are you going to move to St. Anne with his contingency of French Canadian families?
No, absolutely not. We agree, about his, anti-slavery commitment, but we also realize he did not make a strong commitment to the Catholic faith. And many of us are truly committed to our religious beliefs.
But he did defend you against the prejudice of some in the Chicago diocese, did he not?
Yes, he did. And, but we have many differences in Canada, okay? And we will have some of those similar differences here. But the majority of us are committed, okay, to our religious beliefs and our culture.
Very well said, Marguerite. Thank you very much. And now there are two other individuals that are hovering around us that are going to tell me now their name and if they have a question.
Hello, my name is Joe.
Hi, Joe.
I'm also a Bourbonnais Township official. Not quite sure how I managed to do that. I came up from the South. I was very much pro-slavery and still, I've been looking for work, but I happened to go to St. Anne on a visit and I got converted by Father Shinnicky. And so I am now very opposed to the Fugitive Slave Act and doing as much as I can to avoid it. And there you are.
Thank you, Joe. And as a friend, I want you to become a friend of mine. Did you have a question for me?
No, I don't have much question. I've just been doing a lot of thinking on my own.
All right, you're here at my home right now, although your home is in St. Anne.
Well, no, I'm still a Bourbonnais Township official. Like I say, I don't know how I got there, but I am. But I keep going back to visit St. Anne. I like it
I
there.
see. So where do you reside at now?
I'm down the road from you, from your Perry Farm.
Perry Farm. I thought it was the Durham Farm.
From your Durham Farm. I get a little confused, as you can see.
Oh, that's all right. So you live down the Bourbonnais Trace.
It's confusing.
Well, thank you, friend Joe.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna move to St. Anne permanently. There's a lot of good Sears over there.
Catalog?
I'm sorry?
What did you say was very good there?
A lot of good people by the name of Sear.
Oh, I see. I misunderstood what you said, friend Joe. Thank you very much for your commentary.
Good to see you. Hope I can come to dinner again sometime.
Oh, you're so welcome. I didn't know we were having dinner. And this is after dinner. It's 7 o'clock.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
But we'll see what we can muster up from the cellar. And is there another person there that would like to let us know their name, her or his name, and their occupation, and what question that person might have?
You need to unmute.
Okay, how's that?
Very good.
Okay, I am Molly Frame. I am a school teacher.
Welcome, friend Molly.
So I was teaching at your schoolhouse there in Bourbonnais. So I had a lot of support from the families that were sending children there to that school. But I guess my question for you, wow. I guess I don't really have a question for you.
Well, may I ask you a question, friend Molly?
Yes,
As a teacher, how do you feel about slavery?
I am very against it.
How do you feel about equal rights for other individuals?
Repeat that.
How do you feel about equal rights for women, Native Americans, and other races?
I believe we are all God's children and we are, none of us are superior to any others.
How do you feel about capital punishment?
No.
How do you feel about war?
About war?
War,
There's,
W-A-R.
yeah, there's got to be better ways to solve a problem than by
So I
war.
have another question for you, friend Molly. Our family is the only Quaker family in Bourbonnais Grove. And since you've moved here as a teacher, would you like to join our monthly meeting group at the farmhouse?
You said that was a Quaker group?
A Quaker group.
That's funny because, yes, I would.
Thank you very much, friend Molly. Did you have any other questions for me? Shh, shh. I hear the cowbell clanging. Ding, 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 clang, clang, clang. That's the alert. They're coming. The runaways are coming this way. They're coming up the Danville to Chicago Road. Now, the next number of clangs will indicate how many there are. Clang, 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 clang. Oh my, there are 14 of them. There must be whole families involved. Oh, we must do something. Friends, all of you here present, I ask you now, I beseech of you, will you help me and my family shelter and hide these runaways on their way to freedom in Canada?
Yes.
Now, Thomas Stern is gone and I'm back and we need to wrap it up with us a few more minutes and we'll see if we can do that. I think I lost my connection. Maybe it's coming back on. Okay, do you think this will work? It does. All right, now we're going to see how the person you picked actually addressed abolition and slavery. Thomas Durham, who you might expect, if he would have lived long enough, he would have joined the Republican Party. He would have become a black or radical Republican who demanded the abolition of slavery. Did any of you have Thomas Durham? If you picked number two, his wife, Margaret Wiley Durham, even though her parents were Tennessee slave owners, she became a Quaker soon after she married Durham in 1811. Like her husband, she was an ardent Quaker abolitionist, and she lived until the 1880s. And so she would have supported also radical or black Republican faction of the party. I don't know if any of you had Margaret. Or did you pick Noel Levasseur? This very prominent French Canadian pioneer settler of Bourbonnais Grove was a devout Catholic. He was a radical Republican who had no patience for defenders of slave power. That quote was in his obituary as something he said often. I don't know, did any of you pick Noel? Okay, very good, Stuart. And Ruth, oh, she's, let's see, that's Ruth Levasseur. So she came from the Northeast, and her ancestors farmed Yale University and Hartford, Connecticut. And so when she came to Danville, where Noel Levasseur married her in 1838, she would have been opposed to slavery. And like her husband, she would have supported the radical Republicans. Did any of you pick Ruth? How about number 5, George Letourneau? No. He was a prominent political figure. As you know, he became the first mayor of Bourbonnais, later mayor of Kankakee. He was one of the leaders of the Republican Party of Kankakee County. As a French Canadian Catholic, he was friends with the Durhams and the Levasseurs. He was an abolitionist. Radical or Black Republican? Did you pick Elodie? Elodie, George's wife, was his childhood sweetheart and a French Canadian Catholic. And like her husband, she supported radical Republicans and the abolition of slavery. Father Charles Shinneke. Did anyone pick Father Charles Shinneke? He saw Catholicism as slavery itself and was excommunicated from his former church. But to him, Abraham Lincoln was a savior, not only in his legal defense, but in the issue of slavery. And the French Canadian people of French Canadian descent were like Southern slaves, as he once made a remark, and that's in this book. He and his French Canadian congregation in St. Anne, Illinois, were radical Republicans, abolitionists. That one's a little cut off, but it's Martha Durham, and like her mother and father, she was a Quaker abolitionist and would have supported the radical or Black Republicans. Her husband, David Perry, was born in Vermont to a family who served in both the French and Indian War and the American Revolution. He moved to Momence in 1834, a gristmill operator, carpenter, and farmer, and he purchased a Durham farm in 1866. He married Martha Durham in 1845, and he shared her family's political and social views. He was first treasurer of Kankakee County and was a radical or Black Republican. And finally, Reverend Stephen Beggs was born in Virginia. He was a prominent figure in the formation of the Methodist Church in northeastern Illinois. He followed in the footsteps of Reverend Francis Asbury and Jesse Walker. And as a Methodist circuit rider and missionary, they were all abolitionists. He preached the first sermon in Chicago, as I mentioned, at Fort Dearborn, and that resulted in the First Methodist Church of Chicago. He first came to Bourbonnais Grove in the 1840s. And I have here some of the works cited, but before I talk about the books, I would just like to say, I came to the conclusion with those 10 just last week that all the individuals that I offered you to be a companion turned out to be radical or Black Republicans. Going into this, I didn't know that. And that's an interpretation I find very profound. Getting to the works cited, I based a lot of my Illinois history on Howard's book, and I didn't put him on there, but I got to add his name, Howard's Illinois. There's another book by Andrew Del Blanco, The War Before the War, which goes up to 1860. And then the one that I just recently finished, The Zealot and the Emancipator, John Brown, The Zealot, and Abraham Lincoln, The Emancipator. Very profound books. And again, I'm indebted to the writings of Vic Johnson and other local historians. Did you have any other questions for me? Well, thank you so much for coming, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Make sure you fill out your
Interesting.
You're so welcome.